Hello there and welcome to my presentation on natural found materials. The title of my presentation is Natural Perspectives, and the subtitle is from the classroom floor because I thought that's where the people will be who are going to be enjoying the natural found materials the most. I would like to start with the inspiration, which comes from Anita Ruiz Olds. She was one of the main founders of the Reggio Emilia learning movement, and I love this. She says that children are miracles. We must make it our job to create, with reverence and gratitude, a space that is worthy of a miracle. Isn't that beautiful? We've got our table of contents. Today we're going to be covering the materials that are natural found materials, their unique characteristics, their benefits, some of the themes around them. We're going to talk about some design principles just because I think that plays such an important part with our actual materials. Of course, our educators' role. We're going to talk a little bit about how we start with some of the big stuff in our environment, how we make it come alive, make it personal, and then we end up with some of my favorite parts, which are the books, the reading for kids, reading for adults, a few more of adding on to that list, and then our references, and we'll be wrapping up for the day. So the materials, well, they're fairly straightforward when it comes to natural found materials, but the list is this list is not exhaustive. It's never ending. So we would think about the forest, and in the forest we have anything to do with our trees, which would be like the bark and the branches, the stumps, tree cookies. I was hesitant. I didn't know if I should think about driftwood as being over by the water, but at the same time it comes from the forest one way or the other. Driftwood is a fabulous product. We've got our leaves, and those are those deciduous leaves, but then we also have the carnivorous branches with their needles and their cones. We have, and that's both spruce and pine. We have acorns if we're in an environment where we have some oak trees, and then of course there's berries. Next, we would be looking at the earth itself, and there is nothing more fascinating than studying pebbles and rocks and stones. Sometimes we'll find some fossils. Sometimes we can find gemstones, or we can at least imagine that we have, and things like marble even. They all come from our earth. There's the meadow, and in the meadow there's an endless supply of seeds and stems and reeds. There's flowers and leaves and stalks, pussy willows, cattails, and different times of the year for some of these different things as well. There's all the grains like lentils and wheat and oats, and then there's those gourds if we have some out in our gardens. And then there's the moss, which we might find in the forest, but we might find it in a little more, just a slightly wooded area or a willowy area as well. Then we can't forget about what we would find at the water. Beautiful, unique things that we don't see much here in Alberta, like seashells and sea fans, coral and sea glass, sea sponges and sand dollars. And last of all, we can't forget about our furry and feathered friends. And while we would never want to do any harm to any of them, we know that there's a good chance that we're going to be able to find some feathers. Sometimes there might even be a little bit of fur somewhere. Abandoned beehives and wasps' nests, and even a bird's nest, as long as we've been given permission to be able to use it in our fabulous environment. Of course, a list of some of these items come from the references, which I've given down below. Those are two books that I have found just amazing, and we'll talk about those when we get to the references. So there's some unique characteristics that come with natural found materials, and I pulled a lot of this information from a lovely website from South Australia, the government of South Australia, and this kind of springboards from their curriculum that they use for their early childhood programming. So we know, and it's fairly straightforward, but they say that, Natural found materials, more than anything else, will engage all of the senses because of their textures and and oh, their sizes and their colors and their smells and even their weights, right? They're just so very, very unique. Then the neat thing about natural found materials, there's so much um, um, variety in what we can do. They can be moved, they can be combined, they can be redesigned. They're not just made, there's not just one purpose when we're working with natural found materials. They can be lined up and taken apart and put back together again. And that's just gives so many possibilities for learning. Of course, when we have all those possibilities, they just even by looking at them or having them in our environment, they stimulate creativity and imagination in our children, in ourselves. They are perfect for sorting and grouping and organizing and categorizing. It makes having to go out and buy plastic manipulatives with the big question as to why. And of course, the one thing about natural found materials, for the most part, they're readily accessible. It's pretty easy to go find a cup of gravel somewhere, and when we start to look at that and all the shapes and sizes, we have so much activity and learning that can come just from something that simple. And then there's the benefits. The benefits of our natural found materials are that they have the ability to bring out the best of our children because they are easily adaptable, and things like a rock or a tree, they've been through so much, and they represent adaptation and resilience. They allow our children to look at the world with fresh minds. They also help connect learning to the natural world. So it's so nice that the learning can be right. Our children can be right in touch with the natural world instead of several environments removed. When we use natural found materials, it strengthens the child's sense of place. They have a sense about where they actually are and how they fit into our world. It also, of course, fosters respect for the natural world. There's so much that we can be discussing about how to take care of the environment because we're working right with those products. There's open-ended play opportunities, and I love this because there's no prescription when it comes to a tree branch or, like I said, a little cup full of gravel. There's no and some seashells. We can do all sorts of wonderful things to them. They are a renewable resource, and that doesn't mean we just toss them away when we're done, but what a wonderful opportunity to really work through recycling and repurposing different items. Of course, they leave a very small environmental footprint. When we do dispose of them, we know that they're going to be safe for our environment because they've come from the environment. And for the most part, unless we're going to look for something that's a little bit more hard to find in our immediate areas and we perhaps have to purchase them at a store, they are relatively inexpensive. And once again, a lot of this information comes from that material that we got from South Australia. And then we have our themes, and I thought it was a good opportunity to bring Talbot and Frost into this because we've been working with those guys now for a few weeks, and I wanted to kind of see what are some of the things that themes that come from working with our playing with our natural found materials. So of course, there's the realness about them, and that speaks for itself. And then there's that sense of placeness because these items come from from places where there's dense atmospheres, and when we put them in a classroom and we organize them in a nice aesthetically pleasing space, we can really create that specialness that can be created with boundaries, and also set some moods. So that sense of placeness for our children is really strong. There's that open-endedness, which we spoke about before. There are so many interpretations and uses for natural found materials. And of course, the theme of nature and the elements, there's that greenery that we can use for the mystical thinking, and we can have those enchanting experiences. There's the sensuality, the things that use all of our senses, the sounds that we can hear when we tap some stones together, or those textures when we're feeling all the different leaves or flower petals. There's the different ways we can use light with our natural found materials, and the air around, and the scent of spruce branches, or the scent of even a rock, right? Or shells sometimes. Of course, there are loose parts, and that's a really interesting theme, because we can make so much out of these items that become practical tools, like a hammer, or something that we can stir with and make cookies. And so it's really, it's fun. And then of course, when it comes to nature, there's always that theme of doing nothing. And we can set up an environment with natural found materials that is safe and private for reflection, and it can give someone the quietness that they need, just to step away for a little while before they start up again. They can daydream and start planning. As we saw in our video of our kids over in Scotland, that sometimes they were just doing nothing and ready to preparing for their next adventure. So we thank Talbot and Frost for really bringing out some of those themes. So this slide refers to the information that came from the book that Divini and worked on, and it was Inspiring Spaces for Young Children. I've spoken about it already, and this is an amazing book because it just covers how can we make a space that is really inspiring. And there were 7 principles that they have laid down. And the first one is nature is so important because it inspires. And so we want to have an environment that is going to reflect nature's mystery. And of course, the huge component in all of that are those natural found materials, whether they're large for the greater area, or whether they're small and there's something that we're using or making crafts and making music with them or something. The other thing is to the color, and there's all the different colors that we can use that come from nature, whether it's the green trees, or whether it's a red rock, or whether it's yellow stalks of corn, yellow and green. And basically color generates, it creates moods, and it stimulates interest. The other thing is furnishing, and how we decide to furnish the space is going to define it, and it's going to either enhance or not enhance the play experience. So we want to give a lot of careful thought about how we furnish the space. And the reason I put this in here is because part of the furnishing is using some natural found materials and engaging our children in that process, which I'll talk about. It comes up a little bit later. We want to make sure that we have some textures, because they're going to add some depth, and they're going to provide those visual and tactile encounters, right? And so textures, if we have like some sort of a bumpy, sort of a rocky sort of an area, or textures of different types of layers of grasses, and so we can do so much with that. And then we want to have our displays, and this assignment didn't have enough time to go into some of the displays, but the book shows some beautiful displays of children's artwork and their crafts, and how to display them in such a way that they really, really form part of the visual and the spatial tapestry of the whole environment. Also, we want to make sure that we're using the elements, meaning things like light and air and sounds that are going to heighten the ambiance. So, different ways of light can either lift up some energy. There can be areas of the room that are used for the activity. There's others where it's like, this is the quiet place where we go and contemplate things. And then next, there's some focal points that we have in a room. And those are those points that invite people, invite everybody, including us as the child care workers. It's something that we all want to be part of. And then we move to our role, because as we learned, the environment is the third teacher. Sometimes I wonder if maybe the environment shouldn't be called the first teacher, but in any event, we are there. And we have such an incredible responsibility, where our natural environment actually speaks for itself, and we just have to accentuate it. We as educators, we have to give ourselves a little more thought, because it's somehow been taken out of us to be as natural as we probably were initially created to be. So the first thing that we don't ever want to forget is how we view the child. And that is, we view the child as that mighty learner, as that citizen. And it doesn't matter what else is happening, that has to be first in our minds when we are looking at our children. We want to remember our flight material that talks about us being the co-learners, that we have a capacity and responsibility to learn with the child. It's not us imparting our wisdom and our information. We're learning together. And our kids are so intuitive that they know when we're actually doing that and when we're actually just speaking down to them. And the receptiveness is like night and day when they feel that we're actually learning together. We want to be co-researchers, and that means we want to have that enthusiasm and love for learning together and sharing, and that we're going to figure things out together. I think it's not important that we come with all of the answers, but that we say, let's find the answers together. We are co-imaginers, and that means that we come with a spirit of wonder and delight, all of the possibilities, and that we don't rule things out, but that we say, wow, could that really be? Let's give that a try. And that's where the natural found materials are so beautiful, because we can move them around, as I talked about earlier, and redo different things and just continue to have such a fabulous time of wonder. Co-inquire is a little bit more of our responsibility, because that requires us to make our observations and really see what our children's dispositions are, which we talk about in flight, and then we get inspired and we do whatever we can to nurture those dispositions to learn. And that's a really, really important point. And lastly is, we need to help be the creators of this responsive environment. And we just had one of our modules on time and space and materials, and the flight document is just incredible. And it shares about that. I love the part about time, how we have to stop saying, oh my, it's time to do this now, shut the project down. We can say, hey, let's extend this a little longer. And is it okay with everybody if we have a little later lunch? Or maybe everybody can just, grab a bite along the way. And our materials, which we're talking about right now, and our space as well. So, first of all, before we drill down into some of our smaller pieces, we want to talk about the big stuff. And the big stuff is, how are we going to set up our space? So this wasn't the real topic of this assignment, but I wanted to give it a little bit of time, space here. So first of all, what I'm imagining is that we have some high natural wooden rectangular frames, and of course they're firmly bolted down to the floor, so there will be no safety issues. And they're open. And on those units, and they're throughout a room, and they're at different angles and everything. The only thing that's important is that they're able, through their shelving units, to have places where we can connect them to one another. And that way, we can set up, there's flexibility for all sorts of learning spaces. And it's about at this point, or the next point, that then we are almost finished our job, because the rest of what we do is pretty much up to the kids. So there's shelving at various heights, and then we have some large rocks for sitting on and leaning and drawing with sidewalk chalk if we want to, or painting or coloring, and then cleaning them all up afterwards, and then stumps all over the place where they can sit and work on, and they can learn what it's like to be on a bumpy stump or a rock, and you know what, they're not going to mind for the most part. And then we take that environment and it comes alive, and this is where our kids come in, and they help design. They can say, we want some large branches over these shelves, and we want it on an angle, and we want to be able to have some light filtering through, or let's go get some branches with some leaves going on, and we're going to maybe put a fan here so there's just a light rustling, so we're going to feel like we're outside. Or perhaps there are some windows that we can open up, and they'll just have some natural light and some natural airflow, and then we can layer all sorts of coverings. And this is where that the co-imagining comes in, and this is why it's so important that we don't just do it as the adults, but we have the kids come in as soon as they can and share their thoughts and ideas. The environment, the book by Divine and Group is just amazing, and I will leave that at that for now. And then we need to make that space really personal, and that's not really up to us, that's up to our children. But on those lower, we'll make sure there's some lower shelving so they can put some of their smaller material, those smaller natural found materials, now that we've dealt with some of the larger natural found materials. And there's medium-sized materials on shelves, and they can just be display, a big medium-sized rock, and let's say it's red with some strips of granite in it. And then there's those smaller materials that we use for our manipulatives and for playing games and everything, and we'd have them all sorted out in some natural containers like wicker baskets or some stoneware, but something that's very, very natural looking, and yet at the same time organized, as material has suggested in some of our readings. We don't want a junky, messed up place, right? We can have some really artistic storage displays, and I've given some page numbers and references and ways to organize our spaces to reflect the beauty. Now that we've got our space, we can start having some fun with literacy. And so I have 3 fabulous books that I just love. One of my first ones is The Green Grass Grew All Around, and I have an older version of it, but there's quite a few out there. I found the one that was most easiest to reference. And you know what? You sing the song, there's lots of repetition, and it just takes us through all the different parts of the forest, right? And then you can modify it, and there are modifications of these books. I have been out in the snow, and I've talked about, and the snow, it fell all around, instead of the green grass, when I've been with people. So the next one is Leaf Man. This is a beautiful book that shows all, like, lots, just by leaves alone, and all the different artwork, and it just really appeals to some of Gardner's intelligences of spatial and interpersonal matters. I referred to Gardner on this page because I think those intelligences play such a key role in our observation part of our children. And then, of course, there's the book called Rocks, Hard, Soft, Smooth, and Rough. And it just has some really, really cool ideas about how we can logically observe and work through science with rocks. For us adults, and I've referenced them later on as well, I've spoken already about Inspiring Spaces for Young Children by Divine, which is just a beautiful book about developing that play space with natural found materials. The Natural Things resource, which was I've already spoken about it, the web page from South Australia. And then I found there's an excellent book called Nature's Art Box, and it has activities for using natural found materials. I did a fair amount of research on this, and this is my favorite book on that, and I've referenced it earlier already while I was speaking. Now, some tips to add to the adventure for our kids. We've got some take-along guides. Now, there, I think, are 8 or 10 books in this entire series, and they were put out over a period of time in the late 1900s, but I chose these 5 because they apply to what we're working on, and that's trees, leaves, and bark, berries, nuts, and seeds, wildflowers, blooms, and blossoms, seashells, crabs, and sea stars, rocks, fossils, and arrowheads. And they are colorful. They have white pages with beautiful, very, very beautiful artwork on them, very, very realistic with some activities. Some of them are a little bit out of our areas geographically, but still, then we get to learn about that and have those discussions. And my favorite, something I did with my kids years ago, and I am still referring people to it, and that is a song by Al Simmons, who's a crazy children's musician and performer, and it's a combination of I'm Counting Feathers and I Collect Rocks. And you can get them separately, but on YouTube I've referenced it, and it's about 5 minutes long, and it's just this creative, musical, visual, linguistic, and funny combination of songs about this guy who's counting all these feathers and rhyming and counting and everything. Everything kind of falls apart, so he starts collecting rocks. Excellent, excellent material. And that concludes my presentation. So at this time, I will leave you with my 3 pages of reference material, and I hope that you have come away from this as inspired as I have been inspired to give this presentation. Thank you for the opportunity, and enjoy.